Same Southeast Asian schools as the founders of the Chittavecca Monastery, three young Americans decided to take a less traditional approach when they started the Insight Meditation Society and its West Coast spin-off, Spirit Rock.
One of the things that helped us a lot is that we were able to bring some of the greatest teachers of our lineage to America. They blessed us, and then they went home. And what that did made our community different than the Zen centers or Tibetan centers or even Theravada centers where a person from Asia came and settled here, like Zen Master Suzuki Roshi or Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. In those communities, what grew around the teacher was in many ways a bit of a replication of Japan or Tibet or Burma. Our teachers came, saw the deep practice that we were doing, added to it, blessed us, and then returned and said, you have to do it in a Western form.
Jack Cornfield and friends Joseph Goldstein and Sharon Salzberg founded Insight Meditation Society in 1975. All three had spent a few years studying Buddhist meditation in Asia, mainly in the Theravadan tradition of Thailand and Burma. Because of their backgrounds with different teachers, they decided to do something atypical and not base their new retreat center on any one teaching lineage. A decade later, wanting to build both a retreat facility and something that would help people integrate the Dharma in their daily lives, Jack moved out to the Bay Area and founded Spirit Rock in Marin County.
We decided to make a center out here in the West Coast close to the city so that people could come for classes and become part of a community, so that there wasn't an area of life that was spiritual and another area that wasn't, because it's all sacred. And in fact, the place that we need it as much as anything is in our finances or our personal relations or living on this very small planet with so many human beings.
Spirit Rock has grown rapidly from its birth on 410 acres of undeveloped land. A large administrative staff keeps all the activities, schedules, and facilities running.
This was all just a field where they grew potatoes.
But many Western Dharma teachers are like Sylvia Wetzel. They prefer their freedom to running even a small Dharma center,
20 centimeters high when we got it,
with all the responsibilities that can sap energy away from teaching and practice. Thanks to modern transportation, their business cards could read, "Have Dharma will travel."
This is the part of my neighbor.
I'm a so-called traveling teacher. I have my private living situation here, and there are a couple of centers who invite me for longer retreats from 6 to 10 days. And these centers are mostly Buddhist ecumenical centers. They are run by people who, and the house is open for all traditions.
This is my hand library.
From her home on a gentrified pig farm in the former East Germany, Sylvia Wetzel has also assembled an interconnected network over 3 countries of small, semi-autonomous practice groups that meet regularly, support one another, and integrate short retreats into their weekly schedules.
Western philosophy.
And it works. It creates Sangha feeling. They feel really they can support each other. They feel supported by the local group. And it's not just sitting, and it's not just ritual. It's learning to digest Dharma in daily life.
In America especially, many teachers will travel to other centers to lead workshops or retreats. This allows them to expand their communities and to supplement their incomes. Aside from writing a successful book or shepherding a particularly wealthy Dharma center, there aren't too many other ways to spread the Dharma and make ends meet.
So Naropa originally was a storefront operation.
Judith Zimmer Brown is a professor at Naropa, a university founded by the Tibetan teacher Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche in Boulder, Colorado back in the 1970s. She is also a senior teacher in Shambhala International.
We have not developed a really good system of patronage of Dharma in the West. And so it means that there's a feeling that when you're on the circuit as a Dharma teacher, that you are in a marketplace situation that is driven more by desire for fame and money and success in a very worldly sense. And I think this is one of the most dangerous things for the integrity of Buddhism in the West, that as long as people feel that they have to be popular or successful or financially doing very well, that there's a big problem, that we can easily compromise the Dharma.
One major change from Asia in the role teachers are playing is the large number of women who have become Dharma teachers. Although, because of ancient monastic rules, it's still not possible to become a fully ordained nun within the Tibetan and Thai traditions, the numbers of women teachers in the West have grown dramatically over the last 40 years.
There's certain perspective and style that women bring to the Dharma of not maybe so attracted to a very hierarchical approach, and yet not being shy of being considered a teacher and being treated with respect and with the protocols that are associated with being a Dharma teacher.
Many people now, after many years, respect what I do. Before they thought I'm a wild feminist. Why do you continue this topic in Buddhism? Feminism is a topic of the 70s. Why do you deal with it? Buddhism is beyond gender. And so first they were a little bit laughing about me or not taking me seriously, but after 30 years mentioning the topic, it's accepted.
You wore them down.
Well, I used my role as token feminist in many Buddhist contexts with, we say, how do you put that in English? With holy stubbornness.
Tibetan Buddhism has many namtar, enlightenment stories of great yogis, the vast majority of whom were male. Lama Tsultrim Allione ordained as a novice in 1970. She was one of the very first Western women to become a Tibetan nun. 4 years later, she returned her vows, got married, and had children. She continued her studies, which led to the publication of her book, Women of Wisdom, the Namtar stories of 6 extraordinary female yogis in Old Tibet.
This blue was the blue that came in the dream that the temple came out of.
I wasn't originally a feminist or really even somebody that thought about these things very much. It didn't come until the death of my daughter, Kiara, who died at 2.5 months. And after she died of sudden infant death syndrome. And when that happened, it was like everything fell apart for me. And so that was when I started looking for the stories of women. The geomancy of the temple is quite extraordinary. Once I developed this interest, I really focused on it. And some of my male teachers had a problem with that, and they thought it was dualistic. I went into retreat for a year, partly with that question of, is this something I should give up? Is it dualistic? Or is it something that I need to pursue and continue with? And during the retreat, it was in 2001 to 2002, and so September that year was 9/11. My thought went to, where is the feminine here in the lives of these men who did this? What about our reaction? Where's the feminine in the reaction of the United States government? That was a big sort of watershed moment for me, because it meant that I had to leave the Father's house. And that was incredibly challenging to trust myself. And at the same time, as soon as I started doing that, everything began to flourish here. Everything began to grow and flourish in a way that it hadn't before.
In 1993, Lama Tsultrim and her husband had founded Tara Mandala in the remote mountains of southeastern Colorado. However, raising the substantial funds necessary to build anything had been difficult. During her retreat in 2001, she had a vision of a magnificent temple devoted to Tara, a prominent female meditational deity in the Tibetan pantheon.
On the night of the Buddha's Enlightenment Day and Parinirvana and his birthday, I had a dream, and in that dream, it started with the color blue, and out of the blue, the temple began to form. I woke up, I sat up in bed, and I went into meditation, and then into my cabin came this being in a sphere of rainbow light, who I recognized as Vimala Mitra, who brought Buddhism to Tibet, along with Padmasambhava Guru Rinpoche. And he was very clear. I could see everything, the hair on his face, the frayed threads on his robe. And then he began to transmit the rest of the temple to me. And so...
In a complete design?
Yeah, no toilets or kitchens.
Lama Tsultrim has been recognized as an emanation of Machig Labdrön, the 11th century yogini who founded several lineages of Chöd practice. In Tibetan Buddhism, Chöd, also known as cutting through the ego, is practiced amid corpses in charnel grounds. The practitioner visualizes offering the body as a feast to hungry demons. Lama Tsultrim has adapted the practice for the West and calls it feeding your demons.
You work with what arises in you.
Our demons are anything that keep us from being free. One way to think about it is what's eating you, what eats at you. That's your demons.
Because the teacher-student relationship is normally one of unusual depth, it can frequently bring any psychological issues in students to the surface. This can enable them to heal and grow, but it can also result in an unhealthy dependency. Reggie Ray was formerly a professor at Naropa University and a teacher in Shambhala International, both founded by the gifted and controversial Tibetan teacher, the late Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. Reggie resigned from both institutions to found Dharma Ocean in Crestone, Colorado, overlooking the immense and windy San Juan Valley.
Yes. Many people that come to the Dharma come with a pre-existing sense of a tremendous disempowerment as individuals. And they are often initially attracted, for example, within Tibetan Buddhism, to the lamas who are presented as being enlightened. In other words, our sense of disempowerment makes us very vulnerable to projecting onto our teachers some kind of idealized father that we never had. Now, initially on the path, that's necessary. That motivates us to practice, so it's a good thing. But what often happens, especially in the Tibetan tradition, is that people enter into a lifelong dependency on their Rinpoche or their Lama. And what I have found over the course of my teaching is that that lifelong dependency makes it impossible for them to grow in certain ways. And it makes it impossible for them to really enter an adult stage of spirituality. That's the protector up there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's the mountain where the protection energy of this whole area is constellated. One of the issues, that comes up is, what about the Asian teachers? Don't they see that? And aren't they interested or motivated to unravel that or untangle it, dismantle that Oedipal dependency of their students? This is a very interesting cultural issue, because in Tibet, that lifelong dependency was cultivated with lay people. Literally, the vista is about 100 miles from... If you were a layperson, that was kind of how it was. The problem we have in the West is when many of the Asian teachers look at Westerners, they see lay people. And they see people that maybe they feel, aren't going to practice very much and aren't really going to study very much and aren't going to make the journey. So there's a kind of toleration on the side of the Asian teachers of that Oedipal dependency in a lifelong way that reinforces it.
The issue of transference, the projection of an idealized parent figure onto the teacher that can create dependency, is a problem in all spiritual schools. Sylvia Wetzel, also in the Tibetan tradition, wonders if Western teachers contribute to it even more so than their Tibetan counterparts.
I think it was Carl Gustav Jung who gave talks to priests. And his observation was Catholic priests work more in a with cultural symbolism, and the process of transference doesn't arise so strongly. Whereas Protestant priests, they work more on a one-to-one dialogical situation, and their transference is arising very strongly. And when I apply this to the situation in Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhist lamas, they work in this symbological traditional frame, so transference is not so strong. But Western teachers, we are more dialogical, we talk with people, we are more there as a person, we are not disappearing behind our role. So we need education in psychological topics. We need to understand what transference is. This will help us to avoid many problems which happen in Western centers.
The Dharma Center is the most common teaching institution in the West. Large urban areas typically will have dozens of them. They evolved because the numbers of Buddhist converts, even in large urban areas, is generally not large enough to support traditional monasteries. Nor do the vast majority of Western Buddhists have any inclination to become monks. But each new Dharma center is faced with the problem of building a community, mostly from scratch. Lama Shenpen Hookham is the resident teacher at the Hermitage of the Awakened Heart in Wales.
It was Khenpo Sutton Gyaltsen, my own teacher, who really changed my direction, because I was very much into the monastic model. And he felt that here in the West, we're going to have to practice as we go along in our lives, and that it's not going to be, there's not going to be the conditions for the monastic model. But on the other hand, that has huge drawbacks, because we now have to find a way of being a community, supporting each other in the practice of Dharma in the West, without a real, how can you say, sort of ready-made structure.
The traditional monastic model is finding a place in the West, but often in hybrid form, such as at Plum Village, a monastery and nunnery in the south of France. Part of an international network of monasteries whose spiritual leader is the highly regarded Vietnamese Zen monk Thich Nhat Hanh, it is supported by both the Vietnamese and convert communities. Pap Lu is an American who sees an advantage to monastic life.
I feel it's easier to be 100% immersed in the practice, to really let go of all the other attachments, the things that we have to do, working and having a house or a place to sleep at night, a car, girlfriend. I see that since I became a monk, those things, in a way, we close the door on that aspect of our life. Mm-hmm. And so we can concentrate 100% on just the one door of the practice.
In a practice center, when you're living there, year after year, all of life really does become Dharma. Everything is, you hear the temple bell every day, you're doing ritual practice every day. You're really living in a Dharma environment and never leaving it. And so there's a level of inner change, you really do begin to have a perspective that everything is Dharma, your whole life is Dharma. I mean, there are downsides to it as well. It's a life of conformity. It's a life of rules, you know. It's a life of limitation.
There certainly will be a certain group of monastics in the West, and I think that's fine. But I think it's an old-fashioned style of life, monasticism. It belongs to, for me, it belongs to feudalism.
Buddhism depends upon communities having this generosity to support people who do nothing useful, who do nothing productive from a social point of view, because in fact they do the ultimately productive thing from the Buddhist community's point of view, the insiders' community point of view, which is they seek freedom. They seek to understand the nature of reality. They represent the full devotion to that quest for the rest of the community, and therefore they inspire the lay community to try to live at a higher ethical standard, to try to develop more, focus more of their time on the quest of freedom and reality. And in fact, if fully ordained and fully vow-keeping monks and nuns are not in the Buddhist community, there is no Buddhist community.
As Buddhism has become established in the West, Buddhist studies departments have sprouted up within the halls of academia. While they teach scholarship and not practice, they frequently employ scholars who are also practitioners. Some of them have to remain in the closet about their practice. Jan Willis, a professor of religion at Wesleyan College, is not one of them.
To say that one is a Buddhist scholar and practitioner would just cause people to go into conniptions. In fact, I would say as recently as 10 or 12 years ago, you wouldn't say that on your resume. You wouldn't continue to get jobs. You wouldn't be counted as a genuine academic, not as a scholar. A scholar has to have a certain objectivity, as though anyone who had some feeling for a tradition might use your position as a pulpit to convert people. Very suspect.
In the mid-60s, Robert Thurman became the first American monk in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. Today, he is the Tsongkhapa Professor of Indo-Tibetan Buddhist Studies at Columbia University.
I am sad to report that the academic world in the West still remains sort of prisoner of a certain duality. In a way, Christianity is still very powerful in religious studies. And so, on the one hand, that element is still somehow subterraneously present. And then there's its kind of equal opposite, which is dogmatic secularism or dogmatic materialism, and of which the scientists are the high priests, you could say. So-called scientists are the high priests. And so, you know, the orthodoxy for Buddhist studies scholars still is that you should be an anti-Buddhist, actually, sadly to say. Not merely just critically evaluate, but actually anti. In other words, you can be, you know, a Christian person can go to a Christian church and then study Christianity in a favorable way without intruding supposedly his Christian dogma, his or her Christian dogmas and things. But a Buddhist can't, especially a convert Buddhist, because they're going to have, because they're like aliens. And so they have to actually be anti. And the big game to advance their careers in academia is to try to show Buddha was like screwed up, you know, maybe Buddha had a girlfriend, or some Buddhist teacher is no good, or some Hindu Swami was gay, or I don't know what. Any kind of thing to show that they're as bad as the Western religions are, you know.
Can you teach Buddhism without being a practitioner?
I don't think so. Well, actually, I should qualify that. There may be some forms of Buddhism that one can teach without being a practitioner. I think they would be better able to teach if they knew something about the practice. And I think it would be impossible to teach Tibetan Tantric Buddhism without knowing something of the practice. I can give examples of scholarly papers that talk, for example, about the Tibetan Tantric tradition of Chud, the practice of cutting off, that present that as a psychologically violent act in academic papers, and present it as seemingly without knowledge about shunyata, voidness, emptiness of self at all, in an ethnographic, anthropological way, which makes it aberrant and as a practice. Whereas not only do they miss the non-self teachings, selflessness teaching, offering up self, cutting the body in chunks and feeding it as a way of dispensing with self, getting rid of self-attachment, but they also miss the aesthetic quality of Church practice. Is so beautiful. It uses song, it uses dance, it uses movements. They miss that totally.
If Buddhism has any societal imperative, it would be the struggle to replace ignorance with enlightenment, one individual at a time. The arena of that struggle is now modernity, and its standard bearer, the West, where a newly forming Buddhism is now rising. How it responds to the challenge of adapting to its new home will determine its future, and perhaps even that of modernity itself. Part 2 will look at new teaching methods that are emerging, at social engagement, at neuroscience and consciousness, and at the debate, raging by Buddhist standards, on what is essential Dharma versus what are its Asian cultural artifacts that could be dispensed with in the modern world. Reincarnation, even the nature of enlightenment itself, are being questioned. The reformers say Buddhism must change or die. The traditionalists respond that Western Buddhism faces the potentially fatal danger of becoming Dharma light, of losing its capability to fully awaken the mind.
Je ziet hem sneller worden. Dirigeren doe je met je armen, doe je met je handen. En je hebt je pols, ja, je hebt je elleboog en je hebt je schouder. En we hebben gezien hoe langer dat touwtje is, hoe trager die slinger gaat. Dus als ik mijn hele arm gebruik, dan is het traag. Als het wat sneller wordt, dan ga ik het langzamerhand vanuit mijn elleboog doen. Als het nog sneller wordt, ga ik het langzamerhand vanuit mijn pols doen. Groot is langzaam. Of de suggestie van groot is langzaam. Klein is snel. Als ik zo klein, dat kan snel zijn. Maar soms wil je snel en groot omdat het sterk moet zijn. Die suggestie kan je dus geven, terwijl je eigenlijk kleine bewegingen maakt, kun je de suggestie geven dat het heel groot is. Met het dirigeren doe ik het effect van de zwaartekracht doe ik na. Ik doe het na. Kijk, ik kan mijn hand in de lucht gooien, maar echt helemaal slap naar beneden, dat heeft weinig effect. Ik kan wel net doen alsof mijn hand een klein balletje is. Tok. Wat lekker snel gaat. Ik kan ook doen, nee, mijn hand is een kussen. Een heel licht kussen. Dan gaat het langzaam naar boven en komt ook langzaam naar beneden. Het kan een papieren vliegtuigje zijn. Wop. Maar het kan ook een vliegend tapijt zijn, wat even een klein stukje naar boven gaat en weer naar beneden. Dan wordt het dus langzamer. Nou, de kunst is natuurlijk om dat te laten zien, dat na te doen wat hier gebeurt met die slinger. Snel, verlangzamen, stilstand, versnellen en weer terug. Dat is moeilijker dan je denkt. stel, het muziekstuk begint heel lieflijk en heel zacht. En ik doe dit. Dan heb ik iets verkeerd.